Welcome into the horse race. I'm your host, Daniel Vaughn. We cover everything related to the United States election, all the latest polling, everything happening in the battleground states, and the main story is driving the news as we're heading into the final stretch of this campaign. So the big thing that's happening this week is that you see both campaigns really going negative. In the case of the Harris campaign, they believe that they're losing, and so they're going extra negative, and you're seeing a lot of stories in the media about different things being shopped around to different news outlets of very negative stories. We're going to cover that, particularly one of the big stories that is sort of driving things and what the Harris campaign is going to drive their main messaging as we head down the stretch. And then we're going to hit the polls, because both polls and early votes, because the Trump campaign believes that they are ahead. And there's a lot of evidence, particularly as tonight, I'm recording late Wednesday. There's been a lot of polls that have dropped late this evening that have shown that Trump has a clear advantage as we're heading here down the stretch. So we're going to cover all of that, go through a total pass of the battleground states to give you an idea of where everything is. So that's sort of a broader review of the show, and we'll jump right in. So one of the big things that's happened this week is that Mark Halperin kicked off a sort of a big fracas in the news media because he said that he had been pitched, and several other newspapers that he knew had been pitched big stories that if he could figure out if it was true, he thought it would sink or end Donald Trump's campaign. He said what we're seeing in the final days is that actors who want a certain outcome are on social media and in the pitches to reporters. And he specifically calls out the Atlantic here, trying to affect the outcome of the race. And so what you're seeing here are the last ditch opposition dumps across the board. So the big story this week obviously came from the Atlantic, where they accused Donald Trump of wanting generals who, or at least wanting military generals who were linked to Adolf Hitler. So that's sort of the big story this week on that one. If it sounds familiar, it's because it's been in other books, and we'll cover some of that too. But what he's saying is that reporters in and around DC and the New York media and elsewhere are seeing stories pitched to them left and right. Tom Bevan over Real Clear Politics said that he had been pitched the same story. Now, neither of them let on which story this is. It's obviously not the Atlantic story, which was the big one. I suspect it is this one that was dropped in the Guardian, where a woman is named Stacey Williams, a model, accuses Donald Trump of groping her, and he was connected to Jeffrey Epstein. This goes back to the 90s. The key about this story is that it's in the Guardian, which is the media in the United Kingdom, which suggests if this is, and it is opposition research from the Democratic Party, that they could not get a buyer in the United States, which is kind of telling. You're not seeing the Washington Post, the New York Times, or even the Atlantic in this case run with this story. This is over in the United Kingdom with the Guardian, and they're hoping that it spreads over here and is the main thing. That does not seem likely to happen. There are some problems with the timeline in this. Conservatives have been pointing out on Twitter and elsewhere. And the fact that reporters in the United States didn't take it suggests that there might be other problems with the story. But this is probably the main one, the one where you're trying to connect Donald Trump to Epstein and to a potential victim here. That's the big story that I think that you're seeing Halperin, Bevan, and others talk about. It's probably this one. But even with that, the big thing that the media is leading with is this one in the Atlantic by Jeffrey Goldberg, where Trump says he needs the kind of generals that Hitler had. This is not really a new kind of story, but it is the one where you saw Kamala Harris come out today at the vice presidential residence. She's not done any events in battleground states the last 2 days. She's been in DC preparing for interviews and things like that. And she decided to give an impromptu speech outside the vice presidential residence where she blasted this specific piece where Trump is saying this. The problem, as I said, is it's not really new. So Jim Sciutto is a reporter over at CNN, and he said that General Kelly, who's the main source in this, told me the same thing well, he didn't tell him in March. This would have been when his book was released. Jim Sciutto had a book of the Trump administration and some of the Biden administration talking about, the main point of that piece was about the return of great powers, places like Russia, China, and how they're challenging the United States. But he had this similar story where he says that Trump was saying that Hitler did some good things, and there's this whole thing here. That book was released back in March. Charlie Spearing here is a reporter at the Daily Mail, and he says that the New York Times also published a similar story by Kelly in August 8th, 2022, in the book The Divider by Peter Baker and Susan Glasser. So those are obviously very prominent reporters for the Times. And you have Trump talking about German generals. So, you get this sense that this is a similar story that Kelly has told several times. And what you really have here with the Atlantic is a repackaging of this story attached to, in this case, a soldier's death, where Trump was referring to that. Um, the Kelly part of this seems to be old news. The part where Trump is referring to the soldier's family, where he didn't want to pay as much for the soldier's funeral, has been rebutted pretty thoroughly by the actual family of the dead soldier in this case, and most everybody involved. So this is looking like an attempt by the media to repackage an old story, make it new, and make this the end of the stretch. And the reason that appears to be the case is because it's been so coordinated. So immediately after this story dropped, you saw the Harris campaign pull back and immediately start pushing forward and make this their main push. Politico calls this story right here the October surprise in their coverage. That's honestly, that's a little bit of overkill, but just because it's a little late, I think, for this type of story to have that kind of impact. But this is going to be the main thrust of the campaign because this is what Harris led with during the CNN town hall on Wednesday evening. She reiterated that she believed that Trump is a fascist and this is who he really is. And so you're seeing this kind of push that this is the message that Harris is wanting to push down the stretch. The other thing that's happening here is that you have Harris going to give a closing argument next week at the National Mall. Fox News has reported this, The Hill, others have all reported, the Washington Post have all reported that this is going to be her quote unquote big argument. What's weird, and the way they know this is because they've got a permit from her, because if you're going to do something like this at the National Mall, it's a national park, so you have to get a permit. So she has a permit to give with this type of thing, and all the reports are that she's going to give a big speech. Now, similar to the vice presidential speech that happened today, I'm expecting this to be all about this Atlantic story. And so this is going to be the big argument. They're going to go back to January 6th. They're going to go back to Donald Trump is a bad person. Donald Trump is an extremist. Donald Trump is unwell. And that's going to be the main argument here towards the end of the campaign. Effectively, nothing else that they've tried has worked. Harris has struggled to define herself. And so they're going back to trying to make this an election and a referendum upon her. So this is going to be the big thing. That's scheduled for Tuesday. Donald Trump's big event is going to be in Madison Square Garden. So you're going to see these sort of opposing big events in major media markets. His is going to be in New York. Hers is going to be in D.C. Notably, these are not going to be in battleground states. Donald Trump's big event in Madison Square Garden makes sense because if you are him and you believe you had the lead, you're going into New York to try to drive up margins for House candidates in New York, because the actual, if you're trying to get an actual working coalition in the House, you need more people to win in the New York state. And so that's where the Madison Square Garden kind of fits into that thing. It's also a big media market, so it'll make a big splash in places like Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in general. So it makes sense there. The Harris event in D.C. doesn't really impact any of the main battleground states, so I'm unsure why she's doing that. She's going to be campaigning in Texas on Friday, which also makes even less sense. So you've effectively had Harris for the past 2 days out of the battleground states. And Friday she's going to be in Texas, and then next week or Tuesday you have her in D.C. with the big event. Now, obviously, her campaign has responded, well, we have people like Walz and other surrogates in these battleground states handling these things and doing events, but it is notable that she has pulled back here and is not active in any of the battleground states as we're heading down to the stretch here. Because, again, we're under 2 weeks to go here. Next week is the last full week where you've got to campaign and make your final pitch, and votes are being cast. So you really do need to whip up enthusiasm in these battleground states, and she is pivoting to other places. And so this big thing that she's going to make, January 6th, and make this Atlantic story here, the chief part of her campaign is notable because it's not new from Democrats, but what is also notable is that Senate Democrats are running in the exact opposite directions. Jim Garrity and National Review kind of did a good summary of all these things. He looked at Senate candidates in Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, and they've all cut ads, every last single one of them, where they have tied themselves to Donald Trump in different ways. Remember, these are Democrats. And so they're saying things like, we worked with Donald Trump on ending NAFTA. We worked with Donald Trump on securing the border. So they pick the issue that they need in their state and they tie themselves to Trump in that case. And they talk about how they can work with him. Now, they do mention things like extreme candidates on the left and right and those types of ads. But for Trump, they're describing him as a person that they can work with. That sort of undercuts the entire Harris campaign message. So you have, again, Wisconsin and Michigan and some of these other places, and Pennsylvania was there too because Bob Casey was running a similar ad. You have these battleground states where these senators are saying we can work with Trump, and then on the total opposite side, you've got Harris saying he's an extremist, and so her message on a national level is being undercut by the Democratic Party on the Senate level, and so it's a real question of where this ends up dividing and how people end up squaring this because you have two different messages from the Democratic Party here. And, maybe people just accept it and, it's like, it is what it is, but it is really cutting into the Democratic message here. And this is their closing message that Donald Trump is extreme, he's unfit, he's unwell. And then on the flip side, you've got Democratic senators saying, we can work with him. And, here's why we're good and you should vote for us. So that is a big thing that's happening across all the battleground states. You've got dueling messages from Democrats. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is just kind of doing his thing. You have the big McDonald's thing, and he's just kind of going around hitting different YouTube things. He's scheduled to be on Joe Rogan's show on Friday. So you have him just kind of doing his thing. It's a much more positive campaign for the Trump campaign right now, as particularly when you're comparing it to the Harris campaign, which is really driving home hyper negativity around Trump and that he must be stopped at all costs. And again, this is not the same thing that the Senate Democrats are saying. So dueling messages, it's all kind of a mess. Harris is undefined. And so they're really just throwing anything to see if it sticks and trying to make sure they're appealing to as many of these swing state voters as possible. The problem is these types of voters are running out. Let me refresh, make sure NBC's got the latest numbers in here. So right now, if you're counting the things that we have already counted in mail-in and in-person votes, almost 24 million people have already cast a ballot in this election. We have 55 million people, 55.6 million people who have mail-in early votes requested. Some states require you to request these types of things. And it's just looking bad for Democrats across the board. So the way that some states will list the registration. So if you are a Democrat and you vote, they're going to know that the Democrat voted in the general election. If you're Republican and you voted, they're going to know the Republican voted in the general election. Other states don't do that. So like I'm in Tennessee and, it's just everyone voted there. So what you have is in the Midwest here, NBC News is trying to model what they think the aggregate of these votes are. So what they use is they're like, well, we know people for voting in this county, we know people are voting in this county, and we know kind of the actual partisan split there, so we can kind of model out what we think it is. But these are not hard things. So in Wisconsin and Michigan here, this is their best guess as to how much of the percentage of this early vote is Democratic versus Republican. In Pennsylvania, it's actually listed on the site, so we know these things. So you have a little over 1 million people have their votes in Pennsylvania, and that's leaning pretty heavily towards Democrats. But Republicans are also thinking that they're going to make up that here in the coming days, particularly as we get towards Election Day. So that's sort of the big thing there, because you can look at that information. On the flip side, in North Carolina and in Georgia, you're looking at a pretty heavy turnout for Republicans here. That you're looking, it's a pretty evenly split race, but with almost 1.7 million votes in North Carolina here, and we know what the split is here. You've got Republicans just down 1 point to Democrats, and 31% that is an independent vote. We don't know how they're going to vote, but that's what's going to decide that race. In the modeled version of Georgia, you're looking at Republicans with a 2-point lead with almost 2 million votes already cast there. So in Georgia and North Carolina, a lot of people have already voted in this race. I would note in Georgia here, you'll note that Republicans have a 2-point lead here, 48 to 46. Note that the other category is only 6%. So there's far less undecided voters here. More people are split between these two parties here. So that's giving people less room to maneuver. And then you move out west. Out here, Republicans hold a lead in Arizona with 666,000 votes. And in Nevada, Republicans hold a lead here with 320,000 votes. I'm going to dig in a little bit more in here into Nevada because there's a good reporter out there named John Ralston at the Nevada Independent. He tracks all the early voting that happens in Nevada and sort of gives an idea of this is what he anticipates turnout to be. And using some of the modeling techniques that we've seen other places, he's able to kind of estimate where the vote is and where Democrats and Republicans are. And then, he tells you, this is what a person's going to have this is what they have to win by and the margins they have to continue to win by with independents in order to flip the race. And he has been very accurate in some of his previous races from 2008 forward. And he's one of the best resources out here. He has, for the better part of a week now, been giving out alarm signals to Democrats that things are not good. The main thing that he talks about every election cycle is the Clark firewall, as he calls it. So Clark County is where Las Vegas is. For Democrats, you have to run up your margins here because the rural counties and the rural cities in Nevada are overwhelmingly Republican, whereas your main Democratic base is mostly in Las Vegas. Now, there are a few other big cities in Nevada, but it's really all localized in Las Vegas. And so usually Democrats have a margin of around 40,000 votes built up by now in the early vote. But before, he's looking at today's voting and it was only around 7,000. So you're seeing a much smaller firewall for Democrats, and they have a lower registration edge among Republicans. So what he's basically telling Democrats is you do not have the margins that you normally do here. You've only got, about 7,000 extra votes that you need, and Republicans will eat into that pretty quickly on election day. And what he goes on to say is that even if Harris were to win independents by 10 points right now, and they both held their base voters at 90%, she would lose by 2,000 votes. That's according to his calculations, looking at potential turnout. I've seen him make these predictions. He leans toward the Democratic side, and I've seen him make these predictions for Democrats in the past. He's been very accurate. So this is alarming if you're a Democrat because this is just a few days of early voting. They've had 3 or 4 days now in Nevada. But right now, he's already telling Democrats, you're going to have to win independents by a very large margin because you do not have what you need in Las Vegas right now. It's not there. The rural counties are voting overwhelmingly for Trump, and she's already looking like she's on pace to lose. And that is if these things. So what you're assuming here is that if both parties hold their base at around 90%, and then she wins by independents by 10 points. If that's what you get, and again, this seems unlikely with independents because her polling is not that great in Nevada. We'll get into that here in a little bit. So it could be that she, if this is smaller than 10 points, she's going to lose by even more votes. So alarm bells are ringing in Nevada on the early vote from John Ralston and friends. If you want to keep an eye on this, go to the Daily Indy. They cover everything. He does a morning and an evening. As we get closer to Election Day, you'll probably see multiple updates in a day. He's really great, and he's just the best there is at this sort of thing. So, again, this is one of those things where this is a state with hard information. These are actual votes. This is a reporter who knows that state inside and out, has modeled this in the past and is very accurate, and he's telling Democrats, you do not have a lead here. Republicans have a lead, and the votes that you're counting on in Las Vegas are not there. So if this is the case here, then the independent vote, you're really depending on those independents coming to you when they're not so far for Republicans or in other situations. So right now, Nevada is the loudest signal for Democrats. And this is the concerning thing about Nevada for Democrats, too, is that it should have been the easiest vote of the battleground states for them to get. This is usually the reach state for Republicans. Republicans have tried to get this for 2 or 3 cycles now and fell short every time. This is a hard state for them to win. For a lot of reasons, but right now they do have a lead, just outright, and we expect that to continue moving forward. So there are a lot of other states that are reporting early voting stuff. I've seen a lot of Republicans talking about places like Florida, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. I trust those estimates much less just because it's a little bit all over the place. A lot of those people are new. Nevada, I trust just because Ralston has done this multiple times. So you can follow him. If you want to, you can follow him. He's great. But I do trust what he's saying here. I do think Republicans have a lead, and right now Harris is looking down the barrel of having to win independents in this state by at least 10 points, possibly more. If Republicans keep juicing their turnout, Democrats are facing the real possibility that they're going to have to drive out more voters on election day, which is not something they've had to do in several cycles. For the last several cycles, Republicans have been the ones having to overcome these types of firewalls. And right now, it's Republicans who may have the votes built up to overcome any potential votes coming in from Democrats on election day. So big stuff coming out of Nevada. This is the other thing that this tells us is that Nevada has some similar demographics that we can map out across a state like Arizona and potentially even New Mexico. So Nevada is very important because it's really our first look at what's happening out west. So we're going to jump into some national polling there, but I did want to separate and give the early vote its own thing. Again, Nevada is the only state where I really trust estimates on early voting. I don't really trust any of the estimates in some of these other states. So I'm going to refresh this because we've had a lot of polls coming in tonight. On the national level here in the Real Clear Politics average, there's been a decisive shift towards Donald Trump. The Harris lead right now in the Real Clear Politics average is only 0.2 points. The big thing is that a Wall Street Journal poll dropped, a Forbes Harris X poll dropped. Together, they had Trump with very strong leads here, +3 and +2. There was a Morning Consult poll that came out, I believe it was yesterday, that had Harris up by +4, which was a good poll for her. So it's been a rough day of polling here, where two pollsters have come out and just basically said she's behind straight up. If you want to look here, specifically here at the last 3 months here, you're going to notice here, there's been a decisive shift up here. Harris has plateaued and Trump is surging. He dipped down here at just under 47%, and now he is sitting at 48.6% in these polls to Harris's 48.8%. This is, again, when I covered this about a month ago, one of the margins that I said that Harris needed to hit is she needed to have a lead in the national vote of about 2.5 points. That's what she needed in order to get the battleground states in her favor. That's sort of an estimate that Nick Silver puts out there. He thinks she needs 2.5 points. I think she needs closer to 3 points to have a safe margin to win in these states. And right now, she is barely treading water. This is, for all intents and purposes, at 0.2, you're talking about a tied race. And it would be shocking, particularly if this line keeps going up for Trump, to see it intersect here, because it has in the past. The last time Harris had a 0.2 lead in the race was August 5th, 2024. And prior to that, Donald Trump had an outright lead over her. And that was for about the week or two when she entered the race and Biden stepped out. So we are heading back to territory where it is pre-Harris getting into the race officially. That's where these polls are headed right now. And, I could see her getting some more favorable polls over here the next few days, but this is not the type of stuff you want to see for Harris because it shows clear movement. Again, a week ago, I was talking about Harris having a 2.2 point lead, around 2 points, which is, she was on pace to at least have what she needed in these averages. And she's lost 2 points lead over the last week and a half. So this is not where you want to be if you're the Harris campaign. It's a pretty similar story if you look across the battleground states where Trump's lead is very strong. If you're looking here at the past 3 months, you're seeing that it was, again, this is when she first jumped in. She had to climb into the race in these battlegrounds. She gets it tied here, and now there's a divergence here where she is flagging, and Trump has retaken the lead across basically all of them. Of course, some of these are very slim. Wisconsin's a 0.1. That's, if you're focusing on what to do, a 0.1, a 0.2, those are not real leads. That's just effectively statistically tied. But some of these others, Georgia at 2.4, Arizona at 1.6, that's a pretty decisive advantage for Donald Trump in these states. That suggests that the only way that Harris is going to win in a state like Georgia or Arizona is if she gets a polling error in her favor. Right now, I think, at a 0.2 lead nationally, she needs at the minimum, she needs a 2-point error in the national polls. And I'll note here, at this point in 2020, Biden had an 8-point lead. Clinton had a lead by nearly 6 points. Harris does not have the same advantages that either one of them did, and they both finished much lower than these categories. So if you see the same thing here for the third time, where the Democrats underperform here, or you can read it two ways: either Democrats underperform or Trump is overperforming. If that happens with her, this number is going to be red, and it's going to be Donald Trump. And not only will Trump be ahead, Trump outright winning the popular vote would be on the table if that kind of error happens in his favor again. Again, she needs this to flip from a 0.2 back up to around a 2.5 to 3 points. That's where she needs it nationally. That would likely flip a lot of these battleground states in her favor. The other thing I want to focus on here is the generic ballot. So this is just asking a voter, would you vote for a Republican or a Democrat? Right now, Democrats hold a slim margin here, 0.9. That is before the Wall Street Journal poll dropped. Harris had around a 1 point lead. So this 0.9 to Harris's 1 point lead kind of matched. So right now, Harris is underperforming where the generic ballot is. This may get updated as we get more numbers in here, but typically this gives you an idea of what the party advantages are going into Election Day. There's not much one for either party. Democrats have the slightest of leads if you averages all this out. If this ends up being wrong too, and Republicans have it in their favor here, that suggests that Harris has even more pain here to come. So everything here is pointing towards Harris being in trouble. The big poll that dropped was the Wall Street Journal poll. I want to focus on that for a second here because the big number that I found out of this, going through some of the crosstabs, first, people were asked, do you approve or disapprove the job Joe Biden is doing as president? Joe Biden's approval rating is 41%. That is abysmal. That is, if you gave that number to any political scientist and told him the president's job approval rating and he's running for re-election is 41%, they would say, well, he's likely about to lose. He's likely about to lose all of his battleground states, and there's just about nothing he can do because this is wipeout territory. It doesn't matter which party he's in. It could be close for a number of oddball metrics, but 41% is wipeout territory. Donald Trump, do you approve or disapprove of the job Donald Trump did as president? So they're asking about his 4 years here. Total approve, 52%. And I'll note here, the strongly approve for Donald Trump is 38%. That is a very strong number for him. Somewhat approve is 14%. So you get all those together, you're getting 52% here. These are some of Donald Trump's best numbers on an approval rating. He is at a positive note here. In July, he was at 51%. That was sort of at the peak Biden panic moment here. And now we're seeing him back basically where he was midsummer here at the end of the race. The bad news for Harris is that they asked, do you approve or disapprove of the job Harris is doing as vice president? She's at 42% approval rating here. Only 23% strongly approve of that. 20% say they somewhat approve. 49% strongly disapprove of Harris. So you're looking at a very decisive number here. Her approval rating is only 42%, and the strongly disapprove of her number is 49%. These are just abysmal numbers for Harris because you're talking about a strong disapproval rating approaching 50% here, which is higher than Donald Trump. So Donald Trump's strong disapproval number is 42%. Harris's is 49%. These are the types of numbers you cannot have when you're running for election because this suggests that people have very defined opinions of you. If 49% of the country strongly disapproves, that means close to 50% already have their minds made up about you. And that's going to be very hard for you to move them as you head into Election Day. So this Wall Street Journal poll was just bad for her all around. It's not a surprise they found this as a Trump +3. That's one of Trump's best polls, period. You'll note here, I mean, this is matching a Rasmussen Reports poll here that had Trump +3, and I typically ignore them. You just throw these types of polls in the average, like, well, it's just Rasmussen. You can kind of ignore it. The Wall Street Journal is agreeing with him right now, and they're also agreeing with Atlas Intel, which most people on election Twitter and other places look at Atlas Intel and just say, well, that's a Republican pollster. You can just kind of ignore them. This is the Wall Street Journal. They're an accurate pollster, and they're telling you right now this is a Trump +3 race. That is seismic. This morning consult poll here, one of Harris's better ones. This looks good at Harris +4. I will note that this is down because at one point they had this as a Harris +6 race. So she's in one of her better polls. She is losing steam even with them. The same is true of this Reuters Ipsos poll. They have her sort of down where they've had her as high as 4 and 5 point leads. And now she's down to 3. So there's reason that you're seeing this decisive shift here. It's because everyone across the board, every pollster, even if they're showing these types of margins here, which may be a little better for her, are saying she is losing ground in this race. So this is just not where you want to be if you're Harris. There's just no other way around it. We're going to look at a few of the specific battleground states to give you an idea of what's happening here. Arizona is one of Trump's best states. There have been a lot of recent polls here that show him a lead across the board. The last poll that showed her with a lead was a Wall Street Journal poll. That's the previous one that they ran. That there's no way that the same Wall Street Journal poll would show this now, because they had this as a Harris +3 nationally last time, and she was +2 here. So if they ran this again with their +3 nationally thing, this would be a Trump poll. So that would make all these red, with the exception of these two ties here. This Bloomberg poll in here that is most recently showing it a tie. This was a pretty strong Harris poll previously. If you go back and we'll see if we can track it down here, this was a Harris +3 back in September. So it's gone from Harris +3 to a tie race. So this is just red across the board. This is a lot of movement in Arizona towards Donald Trump. And this is just what we're seeing, everywhere. When you're seeing this decisive shift nationally, you're going to see it in these battleground states too. Nevada, we've already covered a lot of the actual early vote that's come in. A lot of polls favoring Trump here as well. He currently has a 0.7 lead. And again, if you look at Ralston's thing where he's talking about Harris losing by around possibly 2,000 votes if it goes according to sort of his initial projection there, just kind of back of the envelope math, a 0.7, that would be kind of where you would expect that to fall. 2,000 votes, 0.7 lead. That's probably not far off from where things are actually happening there in the state. So again, this is another thing where you're out west. Trump is doing really well. You're not seeing as many events from Harris out here. Again, she hasn't been on the battleground states that much, so she's sending surrogates and other things. And this is bad signs for her out west. We're going to pivot here to the Midwest, going to Wisconsin. This may actually be the tightest race that any of the pollsters have right now. It is just an outright tie. The only reason Trump has this 0.1 is because you have this right here: +1 Harris, +2 Trump. Everybody else is tied across the board with different numbers. So this is a toss-up. No one knows what's going to happen here. Republican pollster, liberal pollster, middle ground pollster, no one has any idea what's happening here. Atlas Intel is normally seen as kind of Republican-leaning pollster, with Rasmussen being Republican as well. They don't even agree here. You've got a +1 for Harris on one and a +2 for Rasmussen on the other. So everyone else just has it as a tie. No idea what's going to happen in Wisconsin. Not really wondering where it would be with Harris, because she has had a strong, decisive lead here, if you look, and now it's a tie race. Trump had a brief lead here. It's back to a tie. Michigan is one that the Harris campaign believes is, quote, slipping away from them, possibly. It in North Carolina. Trump has a 0.2 lead here. You sort of see some similar things here. There's some different polls showing, Quinnipiac and Bloomberg have this as a Harris lead. You have the Republican posters saying, no, it's Trump. And then it's just all over the board everywhere else. So this is a close race. Toss up here. No idea what's going to happen here either. Pennsylvania, as I've said over and over, this is the most important state. Trump has a half-point lead here. Bloomberg, they're the most recent one dropped in here. They have it as Harris +2, but you can see across the board here, there is a lot of red in there as well. So this is a state that's kind of gone back and forth. Trump's led, Harris is led. No really idea of where this is going to go either. So the three Midwestern states are a big mystery to everyone involved. You do kind of want to lean towards Trump in this, because if this is kind of toss up, it's sort of a bad news for Democrats. You swing back down to the South. North Carolina is one that, as I said, this is a state that Harris believes is pulling away from her, and Donald Trump is doing better here. You have both Mariest and Bloomberg both saying that he has a lead here. Insider Advantage says he has a lead here. That's with a Republican-leaning pollster. She has one, again, with a Republican-leaning pollster, Atlas Intel, who says Harris +2. But for the rest of this, you're looking at pretty strong Trump margins across the board. Trump has had a pretty steady margin of a lead here. The exception was a little around the debate period when she was much closer, but Donald Trump has pretty much maintained a pretty steady lead here. North Carolina sort of pulls. It's how I said that Nevada was a difficult state for Republicans. North Carolina is that for Democrats. It's a reverse version of that. There are a lot of difficult territory for them. And as I said over and over, I don't really believe any of this polling anyway, because I'm not sure you're able to get an accurate idea of what's happening in Western North Carolina because of the hurricane impacts. There are a lot of people there who are going to be voting because voter turnout there is pretty high, given what everything that's happened, but you're not going to be able to poll them. So I don't trust any of these polls here just because you don't know what the western half of the state thinks. And so we're just going to find out on election day where they go. The last one here is Georgia. This is pretty strong across the board. I will note here the one that really torched the Harris campaign was the Atlanta Journal Constitution, the main newspaper in this state. They had this as a Trump +4 state. Marist has it as a tie, which is Harris's best poll in, frankly, months. Bloomberg has it +2. So this is one of Trump's best leads here. He's at 2.2. He is approaching the point of getting out of the margin of error. Most of the margins of error here are around 3 points, and he's at 2.2. If this margin keeps going up, and you can see here, he kind of has a little lift off here, and Harris is dropping. If that continues, you're going to see Trump probably have a larger margin than that come election day. So again, you can look at all these across the board. These are bad states for Harris. She has bad news across the board everywhere. And the same is true nationally. She's getting bad polls nationally too. So it's just bad news for Harris. There's not a lot where you're looking at her thinking, okay, this is kind of her path forward. The main thing that she's going to have to do in order to turn this around, she needs either a polling error in her favor, or she's going to have to really pick it up and hope that these national numbers here are reflecting voters in states that are unimportant. So she needs to hope that these are Donald Trump picking up random Republican votes and independent votes in places like California and New York. And that's what's explaining this national number, and that she's actually better off in the battleground states. That is a theory for Democrats. But it is getting really touch and go for Democrats. I'm going to pull up one more thing here, kind of show you the state of the race. If you kind of put all these numbers together here, pull that up. So this is kind of where we are right now. This is the Electoral College map. If all these states go where you expect it, you're looking at 219 to 226 right now. That no one's really going to doubt where California and the West Coast are going to go. You expect New York, Florida, and Texas to go the way that they are. No Republican and no Democrat believes that Florida is competitive. You'll hear Democrats talk about making Texas blue. There's no real threat of that happening right now. So that really leaves your main battleground states here. And if Trump's best state is, you got Georgia here and North Carolina is pulling away, that immediately takes Trump, if you give him those two states, to 251. If you give him Nevada, which is pulling away, he's at 257. And Arizona, which is also pulling away, he's all of a sudden at 268. So if you just give him these Sun Belt states here, all of a sudden Donald Trump is sitting at 268. That is 2 electoral college votes away, and he's going to be made president. And that's why you have Democrats freaking out, because all Trump has to do at this stage is pick off one of these top Midwest states here. If these states are moving away from Harris, as all polling and a lot of the early votes suggesting, she's got to hold serve. She has to sweep these Midwest states in order to win. There has been some reporting that maybe New Mexico could be in play for Donald Trump. There's only been 2 polls that I've seen, one released by the Trump campaign that showed him within 3 points there. Another more public poll showed Harris with a 9-point lead. So I don't really know what to make of that, but you would think demographically, if Nevada and Arizona fall and you have some bleed over from Texas, there's a possibility that you could see New Mexico be more competitive. If Trump did actually win it outright, you flip that to him and it's 5 electoral votes. He's president, 273, and he does not have to worry about the rest of these Midwest states. That is a sort of back pocket thing that could happen. It is probably unlikely, but it is a possibility, particularly if Nevada and Arizona fall decisively towards Donald Trump. That could suggest more problems for Harris in New Mexico. But we're not going to know that until Election Day and votes getting cast, because they're not going to poll the state all that much over the next week and a half. So that just leaves the Midwest. And those states, as I noted, they're all dead even right now. So this could be very well where we're sitting right now. The Sun Belt has flipped away from her, and now she's looking at the very hard task of holding all 3 of these Midwest states. And the big question is, where are the independent and undecided voters going? No one really knows that question. We're all waiting to learn more about that, but the polls have not shown anything one direction or the other, and so that's why Donald Trump come in and sweep the Sun Belt states, but if she holds serve across the entirety of the Midwest, she'll get you just flip those and you get her to 270 to 268. That is a very narrow race, very narrow across the board. And you could kind of come up with a way where that happens, where she's able to hold together union voters and she's able to push out minority voters on election day to sort of overcome this early slowdown that she's had during the early vote period. That could all well happen, and it could push her across the board. But this is increasingly it. She cannot afford to lose any of these. That's why she's pushed so hard in Georgia and North Carolina, because if she could just pick off one of these, it opens up another path for her. If Trump holds serve across here, this is a much different map. So this is where we're sitting right now. She's got to hold these states, and Trump just needs to pick off one. If he picks off one of these at all, he's president. If she holds serve, then it's about winning these, and Trump has to flip a state like New Mexico in order to reverse this. So, depending on how this goes, you could see the Midwest be the thing that's the tipping point. You could see New Mexico become a tipping point, depending on what happens here. So, this is the map. These are the state of play. Those are all the polls. As we go into next week, we'll start getting into final predictions and sort of where things are headed. And I'll sort of give you kind of where I think if things are going to head into the final week. I'm going to do a big write-up in my newsletter, so make sure to tune in there, and we'll cover everything in columns as well. So make sure you tune in next week. We'll cover all the latest. Until then, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.